I wasn't supposed to see the message. It was meant for my uncle, but in their rush, they forgot to remove me from the thread. One sentence carved itself into my brain like a burn. Transfer it today before she finds out. The money was my father's. Last trace. He'd worked 3 jobs, skipped vacations, skipped life, really, to make sure I would never be at the mercy of anyone. But barely 2 weeks after his funeral, my aunt and uncle moved fast. Faster than grief. They accessed the joint account he opened for me, citing my emotional instability to justify transferring everything temporarily. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching, especially when my own family made me feel so invisible. I stared at that message for hours. The blue light of my phone burned into my retinas, but I couldn't look away. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Maya, this money isn't just for you. It's for your freedom, so you never have to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve your trust. He'd said that 3 months before the cancer took him, when he was still strong enough to drive me to the bank and sign those papers. I called my aunt first. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called my uncle. Same thing. My hands shook as I dialed again and again until my fingers felt numb against the screen. Nothing. Radio silence from the people who had promised my father they would look after me. The next morning, I drove to their house. The same house where I'd spent Christmas mornings, where my aunt used to braid my hair and tell me I was smart enough to be anything I wanted. I knocked. The door opened just a crack, and my uncle's face appeared, his expression guarded. Maya, you look tired. I saw the message, I said quietly. His face didn't change. What message? About the transfer. About doing it before I found out. He sighed and opened the door wider, but not to invite me in, to step outside and close it behind. Hey man, look, kiddo, your father left that money in a joint account for a reason. He knew you weren't ready to handle that kind of responsibility. Not with everything you've been going through. Everything I'd been going through. Like grief was a character flaw. Like mourning my father made me incompetent. He left it for me, I said. He left it in trust. And right now, you're not thinking clearly. We're just making sure it's safe until you get back on your feet. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Get back on my feet? I'm working 2 jobs. I'm paying my own rent. I haven't asked you for anything. Maya. My aunt appeared behind him, her voice soft and patronizing. Honey, we love you. But you have to admit, you haven't been yourself since the funeral. Missing work, not returning calls. We're worried about you making decisions you'll regret. Missing work. I'd missed 3 days to plan my father's memorial service. Not returning calls. I'd been grieving, not socializing. But in their narrative, I was unstable. Unreliable. Too fragile to be trusted with my own inheritance. Where's the money now? I asked. They exchanged a look. It's safe, my uncle said. That's not what I asked. Maya, you need to trust us. We're doing this because we love you. Love. The word felt foreign coming from his mouth. If this was love, then love was taking what wasn't theirs. Love was making decisions for me without asking. Love was painting me as broken so they could play savior. I drove home in silence, my father's voice playing on repeat in my head. But there was something else now, something I'd forgotten in the fog of grief. A conversation we'd had about the account, about protections he'd put in place. The details were fuzzy, but the feeling was clear. My father had been careful, meticulous. He wouldn't have left me vulnerable. That night, I pulled out every document he'd left me. Bank statements, insurance papers, his will. I spread them across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces, looking for something I couldn't quite name. My father had been an accountant for 30 years. He understood money, understood systems, understood how to protect what mattered most. In the margins of one bank statement, I found his handwriting. Small, precise notes about account features and clauses. One phrase caught my eye. 90-day hold verification. I'd never noticed it before, but seeing it now, I remembered him mentioning something about delayed releases, about making sure no one could move large amounts quickly after his death. I called the bank the next morning. The automated system transferred me 3 times before I reached someone who could access his account records. The representative was polite but firm. She couldn't give me details about account features without proper authorization. "I'm the beneficiary," I said. "I understand, ma'am, but the account shows recent activity that's being processed through our compliance department. Until that's resolved, I can't provide specific information." Recent activity. My pulse quickened. What kind of activity? Sorry, I can't. Can you tell me who initiated the activity? A pause. "The account holders listed were your aunt and uncle, acting as temporary trustees, but there seems to be some kind of hold or flag on the transfer. You might want to speak with the branch manager who originally set up the account." That afternoon, I drove to the bank where my father had done business for over 20 years. I asked for Mrs. Henderson, the manager he'd always spoken highly of. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of professional warmth that made you feel like she actually cared about your financial well-being. "Maya," she said, recognizing me immediately. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was one of the most thoughtful clients I've ever worked with." "Thoughtful how?" She smiled, always thinking 3 steps ahead, always making sure his family would be protected, no matter what happened. I explained the situation carefully, watching her expression change from sympathy to concern to something that looked like understanding. "Let me pull up his file," she said. "Your father and I had several conversations about that account. He was very specific about certain protections he wanted in place." My heart hammered as she scrolled through digital records. "Here it is," she said finally. "A delayed release clause. Any transfer over $5,000 requires verification from the primary beneficiary. That's you, before funds can be moved. The clause activates automatically if there's suspicious activity, like large transfers immediately following the account holder's death. What happens if someone tries to transfer money anyway? The funds are frozen for 90 days while we investigate. The transferring parties are notified, but the money remains in compliance hold until the beneficiary confirms the transaction is authorized. I felt something shift inside me, like a door unlocking. And if I don't authorize it? Then the money returns to the original account, and you, as the beneficiary, regain full control. My father's voice echoed again. "So you never have to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve your trust." I thanked Mrs. Henderson and walked to my car in a daze. My father had known. Somehow he'd known that people might try to take advantage of my grief, might use my vulnerability against me. He'd built a wall around my inheritance, and my aunt and uncle had walked straight into it. The next few days passed in strange suspension. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, watched television. But underneath the routine, I was waiting. My phone sat silent on my nightstand, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. I started dressing differently. Simpler clothes, muted colors, no makeup. I let my hair hang loose and unstyled. When I looked in the mirror, I saw my mother in the months before she gave up on herself entirely. Quiet, defeated, invisible. But I wasn't defeated. I was camouflaged. On Thursday, I got a text from my cousin Sarah, my aunt's daughter. "Hey, heard. You've been having a rough time. If you need anything, just let me know." I almost laughed. Sarah had never texted me before, had barely acknowledged my existence at family gatherings. But now, with my supposed fragility making me the topic of family concern, she was reaching out, playing the role of caring cousin while her parents played financial guardian. I typed back, "Thanks. Just trying to take things one day at a time." "That's probably best," she replied. "Mom says you've been really struggling since Uncle David died. Maybe some space is good for you right now. Space, distance, isolation. They were spinning my withdrawal as breakdown, my quiet as inability to cope. Let them, I thought. Let them think I was too broken to fight back." That weekend, my aunt posted a photo on social media. She and my uncle at some upscale restaurant, champagne glasses raised, her caption reading, "Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. Grateful for unexpected blessings." Unexpected blessings. My father's money, spent on celebration while they told everyone I was too unstable to handle my own affairs. I commented, "Looks lovely. So happy for you both." She liked my comment within minutes. Monday morning brought the call I'd been waiting for. My uncle's number flashed on my screen, and I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Maya?" His voice was tight, strained. "Hi, Uncle Jim. We need to talk. Can you come over? Is everything okay?" A pause. "There's been some kind of mix-up with the bank, some paperwork issue. Nothing serious, but we need to sort it out." "Oh." I made my voice small, confused. "What kind of mix-up?" "Just, can you come over this afternoon?" I agreed, hung up, and smiled for the first time in weeks. When I arrived at their house, both my aunt and uncle were waiting in the living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents, where my aunt had taught me to knit, where my uncle had helped me with math homework. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was walking in as both defendant and judge. "Maya, honey, sit down," my aunt said, patting the couch beside her. I sat across from them instead, in my father's old chair, the chair he'd always claimed when he visited, where he'd taught me chess and told me stories about his childhood. "The bank called," my uncle began. "There's some kind of hold on the account transfer. They're saying there needs to be additional verification." "What kind of verification?" "From you," my aunt said gently. "They need you to confirm that you're okay with us managing the money temporarily." I blinked at them, letting confusion cross my face. "But I thought you said it was already transferred." Another look between them. "Well, it's in process. But there's this old clause your father apparently put on the account years ago. Some kind of safety measure." "Safety measure? To prevent fraud, or people taking advantage of beneficiaries during emotional times," my uncle explained. "It's just a formality, but we need you to call the bank and tell them you authorize the transfer." I nodded slowly, as if processing new information. "So the money is still in Dad's account?" "Technically, yes. But Maya, we really think this is best for everyone. You're dealing with so much right now, and this takes the pressure off you to make big financial decisions while you're grieving." "But what if I want to make my own decisions?" My aunt's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Honey, you haven't been making the best decisions lately. You've been so withdrawn, so unlike yourself. We're just trying to help. Unlike myself. As if grief had turned me into someone else, someone incompetent. As if missing my father made me incapable of managing my own life." "What decisions haven't been good?" I asked quietly. "Well," my uncle shifted uncomfortably. "You've been isolating yourself, not keeping up with family, missing work." Sarah said, "You barely responded to her text last week." Every normal response to loss, reframed as evidence of my instability. "I just need some time," I said. "Of course you do. And having us handle the financial burden gives you that time. You can focus on healing, on getting back to yourself, without worrying about money management. Getting back to myself, to the version of me that had trusted them completely, that had never questioned their motives or their right to make decisions on my behalf. "How much time?" I asked. "What?" "How long would you manage the money?" They exchanged another look. "Until you're feeling more stable," my aunt said. "Until you're ready." Until I was ready. Until I met their definition of recovered, of capable, of worthy of my own inheritance. It could be months, years, forever, if they decided I never quite measured up to their standards of emotional stability. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Maya." My uncle's voice carried a warning. "The bank needs an answer soon. If we don't resolve this hold, there could be complications. Legal issues. Legal issues. A threat wrapped in concern." I stood up slowly. "I need to process all of this." "Of course," my aunt said, but her smile was strained now. "Just don't take too long, okay? We don't want this to become more complicated than it needs to be." I drove home with their words echoing in my mind. Don't take too long. As if my father's money had an expiration date. As if my right to inherit came with a timer they controlled. That night, I sat in my father's chair, the one piece of furniture I'd kept from his apartment, and read through his letters again. He'd written me one for every birthday since I turned 18, sealed envelopes I was supposed to open each year. After he died, I'd opened them all at once, desperate for his voice. In the letter for my 25th birthday, he'd written, "Maya, by now you know that people will try to convince you that you're not ready for things you've been ready for all along. Trust your instincts. Trust the foundation we built together. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let people underestimate you. Let people underestimate you." I'd been doing exactly that without realizing it. My withdrawal, my silence, my simple clothes and quiet demeanor, they'd interpreted it as weakness. But my father had seen it differently. He'd seen it as strategy. The next morning, I called Mrs. Henderson at the bank. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I said. "About the hold clause. What exactly do I need to do?" "Well, the funds are currently frozen pending your authorization. You can either approve the transfer your aunt and uncle initiated, or you can invoke your rights as beneficiary and have the money returned to your control. If I invoke my rights, what happens to them? They'll be notified that their transfer was denied. The funds will return to the original account structure your father set up, with you as the sole authorized user. And they can't challenge that? Not unless they can prove legal guardianship or financial incompetency on your part. Your father was very clear in his documentation that you were to have full control once you reached majority age, which you did several years ago." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in the quiet of my apartment and made my decision. I didn't call my aunt and uncle back. Instead, I went to work, came home, made dinner, and waited. I let them stew in their uncertainty while I found my footing. Incertainty. I let them wonder while I stopped wondering entirely. They called every day for a week. I let most of the calls go to voicemail, but answered just enough to keep them from showing up at my door. When I did answer, I sounded tired, overwhelmed, like someone who was barely keeping her head above water. "I'm trying to understand all the legal stuff," I told my aunt. "It's so complicated." "Honey, that's exactly why we want to handle it for you." "I know. I keep thinking about what Dad would want. He'd want you to be taken care of. He'd want you to have help. Help. Their word for control. Their word for taking what wasn't theirs and making it sound like charity." During that week, I also did something else. I researched. I learned about the account type my father had set up, about the protections he'd built in. I learned about my rights, about the legal language that guaranteed my control. And I learned about the vacation they'd booked, a 2-week cruise to Alaska, scheduled for the following month. They'd booked it with money they thought they'd already stolen from me. On Friday, Exactly 10 days after that first phone call, I drove to the bank. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for me with paperwork. "Are you sure about this, Maya?" "I'm sure." She walked me through each form, each signature. By the time we were finished, the funds were officially unfrozen and transferred to a new account in my name only. My father's protections had worked exactly as he'd intended. "They'll be notified by end of business today," Mrs. Henderson said. I thanked her and drove home. Then I sat in my father's chair and waited for my phone to ring. It rang at 6:23 p.m. "Maya." My uncle's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "What the hell did you do?" "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb. The bank called. They said you denied the transfer." "I didn't deny anything. I decided I wanted to handle it myself." "Handle it yourself?" My aunt's voice came from the background. She was on speaker. "Maya, you can't handle it yourself. You've been a mess for months." "I've been grieving. You've been unstable." The word hit like a slap, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not unstable. I'm sad. There's a difference." "Maya, you don't understand what you've done," my uncle said. "We had plans. We had arrangements made with that money." Plans. Arrangements. The cruise, the car lease, the champagne dinners, all funded by money that had never belonged to them. What kind of arrangements? Silence. Then, financial arrangements, investments, things you wouldn't understand. Try me. "Maya, listen to me." Very carefully, my uncle's voice dropped to the tone he'd used when I was a child and had done something wrong. "You need to call the bank first thing Monday morning and reverse this. Tell them you made a mistake." "What if I don't want to?" "Then you're going to destroy this family. Destroy this family. By taking control of my own inheritance. By refusing to let them steal from me while painting me as incompetent." "Dad left that money for me," I said quietly. "Dad left that money for your future. Not for you to blow on God knows what while you're having a breakdown." "I'm not having a breakdown." "Maya, you haven't been yourself since the funeral. You're isolated. You're withdrawn. You're not thinking clearly. This is exactly the kind of decision he was trying to protect you from. Protect me from. Making decisions about my own life. Trusting my own judgment. Standing up for myself when family members tried to manipulate me. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," I said. "Maya, please." My aunt's voice now, softer, pleading. "We love you. We're trying to help you. But if you don't fix this, if you don't call the bank on Monday, we're going to have to take other steps. Other steps. Legal action, maybe. Or more likely, a campaign to convince the rest of the family that I was having a complete mental breakdown and needed intervention." "What kind of steps?" "The kind of steps that protect people from themselves when they're not capable of making rational decisions." I closed my eyes. There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. If I didn't give them what they wanted, they'd try to have me declared incompetent. They'd paint my grief as mental illness, my independence as instability. "I need to think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," my uncle said. "And Maya, don't talk to anyone else about this. Family business should stay in the family." They hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt something settle in my chest. Not fear, not anger, something calmer and more powerful than either. Clarity. Over the weekend, I made more calls. I spoke to a lawyer about my rights, about what my aunt and uncle could and couldn't do. I spoke to my father's former colleagues, people who had known him professionally and could testify to his mental state when he'd set up the account. I spoke to my own doctor, who could document that I was grieving normally, not suffering from any condition that would impair my judgment. I built a wall of documentation around myself, the same way my father had built a wall around my inheritance. Monday morning, I didn't call the bank. Instead, I called my job and requested a week of vacation time. Then I drove to my father's grave. I'd avoided it since the funeral, unable to face the finality of that headstone with his name carved in granite. But now I needed to see it. I needed to tell him that his protections had worked, that his daughter was stronger than anyone had given her credit for. "I figured it out, Dad," I said to the stone. "I figured out what you were trying to tell me." The cemetery was quiet, except for wind in the trees and distant traffic. I sat in the grass beside his grave and felt, for the first time since he'd died, like I wasn't completely alone. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was my cousin Sarah. "Maya, Mom told me what happened with the bank. She's really worried about you." "Is she?" "She thinks you're making a huge mistake, that you're going to regret this when you're thinking more clearly." "When do you think I'll be thinking more clearly?" A pause. "I don't know. When you're not so emotional about everything." Emotional. Another word for unstable. Another way of saying I couldn't be trusted with my own life. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When your grandfather died, did your parents try to take control of your inheritance?" "That's different. I was married then. I had help making decisions." "But if you'd been single, do you think they would have trusted you to handle it yourself?" Silence. Then, "Maya, this isn't about trust. It's about family taking care of family. Even when family doesn't want to be taken care of, sometimes people don't know what's best for them." I hung up without saying goodbye. Tuesday brought a visit I'd been expecting. My aunt and uncle showed up at my apartment unannounced, both of them looking like they hadn't slept well. "We need to talk," my aunt said when I opened the door. I let them in, offered them coffee they didn't want, and sat across from them in my living room. My father's chair faced theirs directly. "Maya," my uncle began, "we've been thinking about this all wrong." "How so?" "We've been trying to protect you, but maybe what you really need is to be more involved in the decisions. Not full control, but more input. More input, still not equality. Still not the full authority my father had intended for me to have. What would that look like?" "Joint management," my aunt said. "We handle the big decisions together. You have a say, but you also have support." "For how long?" "Until you're ready for full responsibility." Until I was ready. Until I met their definition of stable, of mature, of worthy. "What if I'm ready now?" They exchanged that look again. "Maya, honey, no one is ready for that kind of financial responsibility while they're grieving. It's too much pressure. Dad thought I was ready. Dad was sick," my uncle said gently. Sometimes when people are dying, they make decisions based on hope rather than reality. Hope rather than reality. My father's faith in me, dismissed as the delusion of a dying man. I stood up. "I think you should go. Maya, I think you should go, and I think you should stop calling me." My aunt's face crumpled. "Honey, we're family. We love you. Family doesn't steal from each other. We weren't stealing. We were protecting. You were taking money that wasn't yours and spending it on vacations and cars and champagne dinners, while telling everyone I was too unstable to manage my own inheritance." Silence. My uncle's face flushed red. "How did you—" "Social media is a wonderful thing," I said quietly. "All those grateful posts about unexpected blessings in life giving you what you need. Very enlightening." My aunt looked stricken. "Maya, that's not— You weren't what? Celebrating with my father's money? Planning to cruise to Alaska on my inheritance? Buying a car with funds you had no legal right to?" "We were going to pay it back," my uncle said. "When?" When you were ready to handle the responsibility. And when would that be? When I got married, like Sarah? When I had someone else to make decisions for me? Or never? Because grieving daughters are so much easier to control than independent women. They left without saying goodbye. I watched from my window as they sat in their car for 10 minutes, probably arguing about what to do next. Finally, they drove away. I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks. During that time, I used my father's money exactly as he'd intended. I paid off my student loans. I put a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood he'd always loved. I set up a scholarship fund at his alma mater for students who, like him, were the first in their families to attend college. I also started therapy, not because I was unstable, but because I wanted to understand why I'd let them make me feel incompetent for so long. Why I'd believed, even for a moment, that grief made me unworthy of my own inheritance. The last contact came in the form of a letter, my aunt's handwriting on cream-colored stationery. Maya, it began. We hope you'll reconsider your decision and remember that family should come first. Your father would be heartbroken to see his death driving a wedge between us. We still love you and hope you'll come to your senses before it's too late. I read it twice, then filed it with my father's letters, evidence of the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually do. The scholarship fund sent me its first recipient photo 6 months later. A young woman, about my age, smiling in her graduation cap. Her name was Elena, and she'd grown up in poverty, but earned a degree in engineering. She looked proud, confident, ready for whatever came next. I put her photo on my refrigerator, next to the last picture I'd taken with my father. 2 generations of people who'd bet on themselves and won. Last month, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, like I was a ghost she'd assumed had vanished from the family entirely. Maya, how are you? I'm well. How are your parents? Her face tightened. They're managing. The whole thing with the money was really hard on them. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? She studied my face. You look different. I probably did. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost during the worst of my grief. I was wearing colors again, had started styling my hair. I looked like someone who slept well at night. I'm doing better, I said. Mom still talks about you sometimes. She says she hopes you're not lonely, handling everything by yourself. Lonely. Another word for independent. Another way of saying I should have accepted their control. I'm not lonely, I said. I'm free. Sarah frowned, like she didn't understand the distinction. I paid for my groceries and drove home to the house I'd bought with my father's money. The house where I'd hung his photos and kept his books and planted a garden he would have loved. The house where I made my own decisions and lived with the consequences and never had to ask permission to use what was rightfully mine. That night, I sat in his chair and read the letter he'd left for my 30th birthday. I wasn't 30 yet, but I'd started reading ahead, hungry for his voice and his wisdom. Maya, it began, if you're reading this, then you've learned something important about the difference between people who want to help you and people who want to control you. I hope you've learned to trust yourself enough to know the difference. I hope you've learned that the people who love you will never ask you to be smaller than you are. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season. Inside, my house was warm and quiet and completely my own. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let people underestimate you, until the moment you prove them wrong by simply being exactly who you were meant to be.